They told me it would be easier if I stayed with them for a while, room to breathe sun for my joints, grandchildren close. My son Evan pressed the keys into my hand as if passing me permission. His wife Lenora slid a bottle of Sauvignon onto the marble and said it was for quiet evenings. Both of them smiled the way people do in photos they intend to frame. I am Marion Ellis, 68, retired ICU nurse, widow of a cabinetmaker who could fix any hinge but his own heart. After Harold died one mild February, our bungalow learned my footprints. His level still sleeps beneath the sink, his coffee mug still waits open mouth on the shelf. That home remembered us. The villa on the Gulf speaks another dialect. Limestone floors that reflect not welcome. Sofas shaped like rules, glass that edits your posture. Every towel folded to a grid. Books arranged by color instead of fingerprints. Even the air is curated. A diffuser breathes eucalyptus with the steadiness of a metronome. It is beautiful. Beauty can be a polite refusal. I set one stubborn thing of mine on their immaculate island, a stoneware cup with a hairline crack drifting through the glaze like a river seen from the sky. Harold and I used it on slow Sundays, radio soft knees touching under the table. In the villa's light, the cup looked like a bruise on ice. I left it there anyway. You don't dismiss your witness because the room disapproves. The first afternoon I practiced being grateful. Evan showed me the thermostats and the lock that answers to phones. You'll have privacy, he said. Kindness in his voice, scheduling in his eyes. Lenora kept aligning objects that were already exact, the pepper mill, the napkins, the pen, by the notepad. She thanked me again for the down payment I had offered last year, the money Harold and I saved for trips we never took. We couldn't have managed without you, she said, and smoothed the label on the wine. Within 2 days they were gone on a quick trip, Lenora's phrase light as ribbon. She left a note by the bottle, enjoy the peace. Evan hugged me too fast in the driveway, promising the kids would call. The SUV slipped down the street. The villa clicked shut behind them. The quiet put its hand on my shoulder. In the ICU, you learn to read silences, the hush after a code when the room knows what the doctor hasn't said yet. The quiet that holds breath and refuses to exhale. This house had that kind. It did not soothe. It supervised. I moved through the rooms like a careful visitor. I watered Lenora's orchids with a dropper, trying not to argue with roots. I wiped a fingerprint from the fridge and apologized to Steele. I made tea and watched steam climb out of my cracked cup, as if unsure it had permission. Usefulness, I told myself, is not servitude when freely given. Then I noticed what the house noticed, which napkins I chose, whether my shoes were parallel to the baseboard, whether I placed the remote face up or down. Morning rearranged nothing, the floors gleamed, the orchids stared, the diffuser metronomed its eucalyptus certainty. I took on chores that left no trace, polished spoons, straightened spice jars until their labels read like a sentence folded laundry into obedient squares. I told myself I was helping. Sometimes help is a costume for trying not to be a burden. At the end of the hall, a linen cupboard waited like a chapel cedar shelves. Stacks aligned by width, towels thin as paper and thick as clouds, each sheet scented faintly with lavender that had never met a plant. I reached in to nudge a runner that insisted on being half an inch off. My knuckles touched cold. Not tile cold, metal cold, disciplined, deliberate. I slid my hand behind the folded throws and past a storage bin labeled seasonal. My fingers found a lip, then a seam, then the secretive sigh of a hinge. Harold used to say every hinge wants honest work. If it stops moving, it complains. This one complained in a private voice. Something had been built into the back of the cupboard, the size of a baking pan turned on edge. A latch sat a few millimeters proud, like someone had closed it with their mind elsewhere. I stood still until the washer finished its cycle and the villa stopped pretending to breathe. Then I pressed the latch with the side of my thumb. No keypad, no code, no red light denying entry. The panel yielded with the quiet surrender of a thing that has been waiting to be asked properly. I did not swing it open like a door at the fair. Nurses know about drapes and wounds and how exposure can hurt. I lifted the edge as if the cupboard could feel shame. The hinge exhaled. Afternoon light from the window laid a pale square across the hidden shelf. Inside, not jewelry and not passports. No dramatic clatter. A bundle of envelopes, a dozen or more, sat bound with a tired rubber band paper the color of tea and old cream. The top one was thick, the kind of stationery chosen to announce importance before it speaks. A return address sat in the corner, a name I didn't recognize, an address uptown. The second envelope carried Evan's full name, middle initial, punctilious, written in a hand that wasn't his. Before I saw mine, my body told me it was there, the strange electricity of a room, deciding to say you aloud. It waited on a third envelope, Marion spelled correctly in careful blue ink, the old bank error, fixed as if someone had been patient with the letter A, not mom, not mother. Marion, the name I sign, at pharmacies, and on forms when I want ink to carry weight. I did not reach for them, not yet. I let my hands forget the way to touch and watched dust move like thought through the slant of light. The cupboard breathed cold across my wrists. The house hummed its tidy hum. Somewhere a motion sensor noticed me and glowed a brief blessing. A house can mistake the quiet person for the safe one. A family can too. I understood that more than I wanted to. I closed the panel until the seam hid itself, but left the latch as I had found it, imperfect, uncommitted. In the kitchen, I rinsed my cracked cup and set it where the light pooled. The vein in the glaze caught sun like a thin scar. I washed my hands the way years of practice taught me brisk and precise organizing thought along with skin. When I dried them, I folded the towel in halves, not in Lenora's parade ground thirds. The cloth wrinkled and let go. I walked back to the linen cupboard cedar white, smelling of preparation. I told myself I was only straightening. That much was true. I adjusted the stack of pillowcases, lifted the blue throws an inch, found the panel with the hand that already knew it, and listened for the hinge that by then had learned my name. The cedar smell met me first clean and rehearsed as I opened the linen cupboard the way a person revisits a sentence to make sure she read it right. My hand found the panel without looking. The hinge answered with its private sigh. I lifted the edge and let late light spill over the hidden shelf. The bundle of envelopes waited where I had left them. A rubber band collapsed into the shape of patience. I slid the top one free. The paper had weight. Someone had paid for authority. In the corner, embossed letters announced Victor Hale, Ph.D. CFA, with an office suite number near the financial district. I did not know him. I knew his type men who iron language until it lies flat. Lenora, if Evan hesitates to execute the revised trust, this quarter redirect leverage, position his mother's presence as cost care space privacy. Reframe her contribution as an unconditional gift, express gratitude, publicly remove the claim privately. Any documents should be wet sign only. Avoid text or email, use voice. Evan is compliant when the children's stability is foregrounded. A sentence had been underlined. The ink dented the paper in a way that suggested certainty, not emphasis. In the margin, a smaller hand, Lenora's tidy script had written, E can live with for the kids. The second envelope carried Evan's full name printed in the formal way he uses when he wants to look unassailable. Inside lay a draft titled Durable Power of Attorney. The paragraphs marched neatly bullet points with permissions stacked like trays to transfer to sell to refinance to sign. At the bottom, a signature weighted Marion Ellis, so smooth it might have been drawn with a ruler. I held it close. The downstroke on the M didn't hesitate where my hand always does. The curl on the R forgot my arthritis. It was beautiful in the way forged orchids are beautiful, convincing, from a distance, wrong in the throat. The third contained a memo with bullet points on timing and market opportunity windows. The fourth more, Hale noted that a notary sympathetic to sensitive family matters could be retained for in-home appointments. In the margin of that one, Lenora had numbered steps. 1, talk space with mom. 2, health planning. 3, sign weekend. She had written the word gentle and circled it twice. At the bottom of the stack, I found something thinner, a photocopy of a handwritten note. The date on the corner belonged to a winter long before Harold's chest failed. It was a thank you I had written to a neighbor when Evan was small and wheezing, when 2 in the morning smelled like menthol and burnt coffee. My loops were big, then my optimism too. Across the copy, in the same tidy script, someone had labeled it sample. I placed my thumb over the word and took it away again. The ink stayed. A house can hold its breath. The villa did. The diffuser in the hall gave up a measured cloud. The motion light above the stairs woke and slept. I rested the forged signature beside a page torn from the notepad near the pantry. I wrote my name, Marion Ellis, 3 times. Each one arrived like a person after a hill, slightly winded, stubbornly present. The difference between alive and practice is not supposed to be subtle. I slipped my phone from my pocket and opened the camera. The first time my hands shook enough to blur the frame. I breathed and tried again. Nurses learn early that a second attempt isn't failure. It's care. I took photos of Hale's letter of Lenora's notes of the draft with its too smooth name. I took a wide shot that showed the stack, the panel, even the seam of the cupboard, because a photograph without place can be accused of imagination. I cataloged the images, naming each with a date and a word. Hale 1 strategy, POA, draft, forged margin notes, gift. Evidence lies more obediently when invited into order. The panel closed the way a wound closes when the edges meet. I left the latch the same slightly proud specific as a heartbeat, then crossed the hall with my phone heavy in my palm. The island's marble felt colder than the cupboard metal. I set my cracked cup beside the notepad, its vein catching that small square of sun. A person needs one honest thing in the room. Sometimes that thing is a cup. I rinsed my hands for a long time, the way I had after pulling off gloves at 3 a.m. when the ICU air lived inside my pores. Soap water, friction rinse, thumbnails, wrists. My mind stacked tasks in the same order. Photograph, return, record, name. My body remembered being the person who made sure no one confused vials. Accuracy is a form of mercy. When the light had turned from late to almost evening, I slid the back door open. Warm air came in damp with salt. Next door, a figure bent over a coil of hose, straightened and lifted a hand. Afternoon, he called. His voice had burrs in it, the kind that come from years of wind. Afternoon, I said. He leaned forearms on the fence as if the fence were a bar at the end of a shift. You're new. Visiting, I said. For a while. Name's Gus Navarro, he said. Boats. Not anymore, but boats anyway. He peered toward the white of the villa. Place keeps its arms crossed. That obvious houses talk, he said. They'll tell you whether to sit or stand. This one tells you to keep your shoes on. I laughed before I meant to. It came out small, but it came. I used to work in a unit where the machines beeped more than people spoke, I said. I thought I knew about talking rooms. You do, Gus said. You can hear when a room wants witnesses. He tapped the fence once, a practical little benediction. If you ever need a second pair of eyes carrying something to the truck, you holler. I nodded, thank you. After he went back to his coil of hose, I stood with my hands on the sliding door frame and let Salt lean into the kitchen. The cup on the counter wore a halo. I closed the door not to keep the air out, but to hold my balance in. Back at the island, I unlocked my phone and scrolled to a name I had not called in years. May Corbett used to be the kind of nurse who could steady a room without raising her voice. We had split night shifts, traded granola bars at dawn, charted through storms. When Harold died, I got smaller. May kept leaving voicemail that ended with, I'm here. The last time I answered, we spoke about his tool belt as if it were a person. Then I stopped picking up. The phone rang twice. Corbett, she said, rehearsal and warmth braided in. It's Marion, I said. The silence that followed had weight and welcome. Well, May said, softening. My shy ghost returns. I'm sorry, I said. I meant for the years and meant for today. I need you. Then I'm glad you called. I told her about the cupboard, the panel, the letters that had ironed their sentences until they could slide under doors. I told her about Hale, his strategy words, and about the draft with my name that wore a stranger's bones. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. May listened the way she used to listen to monitors leaning forward through the line. When I finished, I could hear her exhale. Okay, she said. First, breathe. Second, you still make your notes like a person who trusts paper. I took photos, I said. Named them. Put everything back as I found it. Good, May said. Chain of custody for a kitchen cupboard. I heard her chair roll. Paper rustled at her end. I left the hospital 4 years ago, she went on. Went to work in a family practice, then a small firm. I am not a lawyer. Don't promote me. But I can be precise. Here's what we do when families confuse love with paperwork. I'm listening, I said. Make a record that isn't yours alone, she said. A postmark is a witness who doesn't forget. Put copies of the important parts in an envelope. Send it to yourself certified. Keep the receipt. That date belongs to you. Do not take originals. Do not sign anything you didn't start. And Marion, yes, don't second-guess the part of you that recognizes your own name when it's wearing a borrowed dress. I pressed the phone between my ear and shoulder and reached for a pen. What do I label the folder? Something dull, May said. Household finder, receipts words that don't invite elbows. I heard keys tapping. If there are notes in Lenora's hand where she uses terms like gift or care as cost, photograph them well. The law loves plain words. There's a sentence I said about presenting my presence as expense. That sentence is ugly and useful, May said. Ugly because it speaks out loud what people like to hide inside thanks. Useful because it proves the shape of the plan isn't in your head. I wrote certified mail tomorrow. Then I crossed out tomorrow and wrote now. I hung up not because I wanted to, but because the plan lived in my legs. The post office sat 3 blocks inland between a bait shop that smelled like low tide and a pharmacy that sold postcards of sunsets it did not create. The counter clerk wore freckles and a lanyard and the kind of patience reserved for returns without receipts. How can I help? She asked. I'd like this mailed to me, I said, placing the envelope on the scale. Certified return receipt. She measured with her eye. The machine measured with its hum. Stamps lined up like votes on the corner. She lifted the red stamp and pressed down. The thunk landed in my bones. Here's your tracking, she said, sliding me the slip. You'll get a card to sign when it arrives. Thank you, I said. On the way back, I walked past Gus's fence. He was not there. His hose lay like a question mark. The villa shone at the end of the street as if reflecting could count for welcoming. Inside, I set the receipt under a magnet shaped like a lemon. I wrote the number in my notebook twice. Then I opened the drawer where Lenora kept her pens, a fountain pen nested in velvet. I signed my name across the envelope's flap, not to instruct the post office, but to tell myself I had pressed skin to this act. I carried the second envelope, a thinner one addressed to no one, in my pocket. It was not a letter to Evan or Lenora. It was a list of facts with the dates in the margin, and the verbs underlined, found photographed, returned mailed. My hand steadied as I wrote. Precision has always been my apology and my defense. The house tried to smooth me. I let it try and then moved a hair out of line. I unplugged the diffuser and opened the window an inch. I left my knitting bag on the sofa with a small collapse of wool, as if gravity had earned a say. I turned on the radio and let a baseball announcer talk about a curveball like it was a weather system. I cooked onions until the air recalled kitchens that forgive. The pan sang. Steam fogged a corner of the most perfect glass. At the table, I gathered the photos into a folder and labeled it Receipts in a straight, uninteresting hand. Then I pulled the cupboard panel again, counted the envelopes, checked the angles of their corners, and returned each to the little stage it knew. When the panel closed, I pressed the latch gently as if it were a patient's shoulder. Not everything needs force to stay closed. I brewed tea in the cup that still pretended to be broken. The crack caught light like a thread someone had decided not to cut. I carried it to the porch and sat with both hands around the heat. The sky toward the gulf kept its light later than my body expected. Palm fronds negotiated with a breeze. My breath matched something outside me, instead of something inside this house. I thought of Evan as a boy who never scuffed his sneakers on purpose, who arranged his toy cars by color and then by make. I thought of the way Lenora's smile never reached her eyes, and the way she can make the word thank you feel like a silk rope. I thought of Harold under a sink headlamp, braced, saying to the hinge, "Tell me what you want and I'll meet you halfway." In the morning, the mail slip still clung to the magnet. I made a copy of it and tucked the copy into the glove box of my car. I set the original in the notebook under receipts and dated the page. I wrote the time as well. In nursing, no one trusts a note without a time. I moved through the villa as if the air had recalibrated. I watered the orchids, but not with a dropper. I carried them to the sink and let tap water run through the roots until even the glass pots looked startled. I set them back damp and unapologetic. I folded towels in halves. I left a spoon to dry on the counter because metal likes air. The second time I opened the cupboard that day, the hinge greeted me like an old coworker, professional, unsurprised. I did not take anything out. I counted, looked, listened. The act of not taking becomes part of the record. Silence can be set in ink if you write it down. Late afternoon brought the kind of rain that erases edges. It crawled down the sliders and collected in little temporary rivers on the patio tile. I stood in the doorway with my cup and watched water test everything it touched. The smell came in green and mineral. Somewhere under it, I found a steadiness I recognized from nights when the code team ran, and the room slowed without asking permission. When the rain moved on, the neighborhood came back in pieces, a gull's complaint tires hissing a screen door that never learned discretion. I sat at the table and wrote a page headed Household Notes. The headings were simple: cupboard panel, back wall, linen closet. Envelopes, 12 plus. Hail letters at least. 2. POA draft signature inconsistent with baseline. Margin notes, gift care as cost children stability. I stapled a printout of 3 photos, careful not to block dates. I signed my name not because I needed to be official, but because I am the person who was there. Evening trimmed the edges off the day. I made eggs and ate them standing up because a plate can communicate dignity whether a person sits or not. The radio guy said something about a swing that looked better than it was. I laughed once a single syllable, then rinsed my pan. Before bed, I went to the doorway and looked at the gulf's thin line between houses. The villa behind me shone in its curated way. Somewhere in its wires, a motion sensor filed my shape. I stepped back inside and clicked off the light. The room held me anyway. In the morning, I woke with a clear list of verbs. I did not argue with it. I lived it. I scanned the photos to a secure folder that would not show up when a person typed vacation. I exported them with timestamps visible. I backed them up to a drive shaped like a key and slid the key into a tin of loose tea that Harold had once labeled fennel, even though it was never fennel. I wrote the password on a sticky note and tucked the note into a book 3 people in the world would ever open on purpose. Around noon, I drove back to the post office to send a second envelope, not because I needed 2 witnesses, but because redundancies calm me. The clerk stamped it with the same unbothered thunk. I thanked her by name. Her tag said Nia. She looked surprised to be seen. That happens to people who handle everyone's proof and almost no one's attention. On the way home, I stopped for butter and a lemon and a box of tea I didn't need. The cashier asked if I wanted a bag. I told her I had my own. When I slid the groceries into the reusable tote in the parking lot, the sky reflected itself in the car window and looked like a picture someone else had taken. I closed the trunk, opened it again, and put the tote on top so it wouldn't sweat. Back in the kitchen, I zested the lemon because it felt right for the room to smell like something that had met sunlight. I stirred butter and zest and sugar the way Harold used to stir joint compound slow until it listened. The oven warmed. Flour clouded the counter and settled like permission to live. While the cake baked, I took the gray cardigan from my bedroom and slipped a single folded page into the right pocket. The page did not instruct anyone. It did not plead. It listed the names of people I would call if the room tried to rearrange me. It listed one more myself. I slid the cardigan back into the drawer and closed it halfway the way you leave a door for a cat. I don't own a cat. It comforted me anyway. The oven timer rang. The cake rose and split a little down the center the way truths do. I turned it out, let it steam its story into the room, and cut a slice too hot for a fork. I ate the heat and felt it move through me. When the kitchen cooled, I washed the whisk and set it on a towel. I wiped the counter and left a smear of flour anyway. The cup now stained the faint color of black tea looked like itself. I placed it on the island in the exact square of light it likes and let the house memorize me. By the time the cake cooled, the light had thinned to that violet hour when the gulf looks like metal laid flat. I carried a slice and my cracked cup to the porch and let the chair admit me. The cup warmed my hands. The wind moved the hibiscus leaves in patient conversations I didn't need to join. Inside the villa held its temperature like a promise it made to itself. Headlights swept the lawn white arcs over the grass and the seawall. Tires ground into the gravel. Doors opened. Luggage thumped. Lenore's laugh hit first bright, practiced an edge polished to shine. Evan's voice followed lower, careful the way he speaks when he wants points for gentleness. They didn't see me until Evan reached for the lock. The porch light made a halo of dust around the bulb. The key paused in his hand. "Mom," he said as if testing whether the room would echo. "You're up." "I am," I said. Lenore stepped into the light. Travel didn't wrinkle her. Her linen dress hung with the crisp authority of a yes that expects no. "You didn't have to wait," she said, smiling. "We hoped you rested." "I wasn't waiting," I said, and sipped my tea. For a moment, the only sound was the small surf against the stones and an insect's thin machine. Evan turned the key. The lock clicked. Air conditioning exhaled. He carried the suitcases inside. Lenora followed, flipping a switch that lit the entry like a showroom. I stayed seated. When Evan came back to the threshold, he didn't cross. He kept his hands in his pockets the way he had as a teenager when he hid late homework. "There's something I want to ask," he said, voice low, truthfully. I set the cup down on the little table and met his eyes, then asked plainly. He glanced toward the hall, toward the place where if you were a person who built hiding places, you would build one. "Did you go through our private things?" I let quiet stand between us until it made its own shape. "I opened what wasn't closed," I said. "That's different from breaking." Lenore reappeared behind him, sleeves immaculate, mouth like a seam. "There was no need to search Marion. If you were worried about anything, you could have spoken to us directly." "That would require the thing to be safe to name," I said. I kept my voice level. "Nursing taught me that tone is sometimes a scalpel." Evan's throat moved. "What did you find?" "Paper," I said. "Instructions about me that were not for me. A draft with my name pretending to be my hand." He flinched and tried to master it. The attempt was a smaller flinch. Lenore stepped onto the porch, taking the outside space as if it owed her. "If you misunderstood a document, I can read," I said. "And I remember my own signature the way a body remembers an old injury." She looked past me to the table, found my cup, found the cake, found the single crumb I had not wiped away. The frown that crossed her face was quick and clean, like a person drawing an X through a line on a list. "Let's be civil," she said. "We just drove all day." "I'm already being civil," I said. "I'm using nouns." Evan sat in the other porch chair, hands clasped as if suburbs required prayer. Shadows made him older. He waited and then tried a lane he prefers. "Mom, you know we love you." "Love doesn't file me under costs," I said. "It doesn't call what I put down a gift, so it can be lifted out of the ledger." Lenore's eyes worked through me toward the idea of me. "If there's confusion, we can clear it up face to face," she said. "No need for drama." "No drama," I said. "Just paper meeting light." I stood, not fast, not theatrical, and went inside. The villa followed me with that air of efficient astonishment it gave to every human act. On the console table beside the entry sat my laptop. I opened it and let the screen rise into the room. The camera showed me my own face, older than I feel, exactly as old as I am, and then shifted to the contact window I had already arranged. May's icon pulsed one applause. I clicked. Her face filled the screen glasses low on her nose, gray threaded into her dark hair like a decision kept. "Evening, Marion," she said, then noticed the two figures behind me. "Hello." Lenore lifted her chin half an inch. "And you are—" "May Corbett," she said. I worked with Marion for 2 decades in an ICU that ate lesser women for breakfast. A small smile ghosted her mouth. These days I work in family practice administration. I know forms when they lie and when they tell the truth. Evan hovered near the entry, not crossing the frame, not leaving it either. Lenora folded her arms deliberately, as if the fold itself could authorize the moment. "This is a private matter," she said. May's voice didn't rise. "Privacy isn't a drop cloth you throw over forgery and call it protection." She held up a printout, one of the photos I had sent. "This is a letter on the letterhead of a Mr. Victor Hale. In it, he recommends, among other things, that Marion's presence be presented as a cost, and that her contribution be described as gift in public and otherwise removed. That margin note appears to be in your hand." She looked over the printout. "Dispute that if you like." Lenora's mouth prepared something, then changed its mind. May lifted a second page. "This is a draft of a durable power of attorney bearing Marion's name. The baseline signature Marion provided me, which she signed today on a blank sheet, does not match the fluidity and pressure of the one on this draft. A notary willing to rubber stamp in a living room does not make a forgery true. If anyone presents this as signed by Marion, they'll meet a very bored judge who's seen this movie before." Evan moved then 2 steps forward, palms open, the way a man opens them when he's caught between defense and surrender. "We were trying to arrange things," he said, looking at me instead of the screen, "so that there'd be less stress. So that—" "Say the rest," I said. "So that the house would be secure," he finished. "For the kids, for all of us. The words you want are in my control," I said. "You can use the right ones. They already exist." Lenora found her calm the way she finds the middle of a table runner. "You moved in," she said. "We offered you space. We thanked you for your generosity. If legal drafts were explored, it was for efficiency, not malice." "Efficiency is fine for shipping," May said. "It's not a defense for erasing someone while smiling at them." Lenora cut her eyes toward the laptop. "You don't know this family," she said. "I know what's on paper," May said. "Paper doesn't blush." I rested my hand off the chair back. The line of my shoulder loosened. "I don't need speeches," I said. "I need ink that tells the truth." Evan swallowed. His jaw worked through something it didn't have a name for. When he spoke again, his voice had sand in it. "What would make this right to you?" "This?" "Set it down properly," I said. "Acknowledge the money as what it was, not a donation you can clap over. Remove gift anywhere you planted it. Put in writing that I contributed to this place, and that my care for your children had value, not because I charge you, but because it kept the world upright while you built a life in it. No more drafts that borrow my name. No more strategies that turn me into a lever." Lenora exhaled in a thin line. "You're being theatrical," she said. "You confuse theater with clarity," I said. "It may be habit." May's voice stayed steady, a metronome a person can trust. "If you two want to resolve this at the kitchen table, that's possible. If you want to resolve it somewhere with a seal on the wall, that's also possible. Marion has more than enough to be heard." Evan's eyes dropped to the boards. For a second, he looked like the boy who lined up toy cars by shade and then by year breath held as if alignment might stop weather. When he looked up, whatever still tried to pass itself off as pride had slackened. "Okay," he said, and the words sounded like labor. "Okay?" Lenora made a noise in her throat, the kind a person makes when a door they didn't plan to open unlocks. She shifted, calculating how to enter a room that had already been drawn without her compass. "We can discuss terms," she said. Calmly. "I am calm," I said, which was true and new. I closed the laptop without flourish. May's face folded into black. Her presence stayed like a hand on my back. The room held the silence the way good rooms do without shaming it. We moved inside. The kitchen lights made everything a little too hard. I set my cup on the island and let the tea ring mark the marble faintly a moon that would wipe away in a minute. Lenora stood by the sink and crossed and uncrossed her arms. Evan reached for the chair he always chooses, then didn't sit in it. "You made this a home," he said, looking at the floor and then at me, and then at some place that wasn't a place. "I forgot that while I tried to make a plan." "You didn't forget," I said. "You selected." He blinked, took the correction, held it. "I selected," he said. The diffuser on the sideboard issued a citrus breath insistent as a person clearing their throat at the wrong time. I unplugged it. The silence that replaced its hum surprised no one. Lenora spoke carefully, building the sentence like a bridge to a cliff. "If repayment is the issue, we can repay. If acknowledgement is the issue, we can acknowledge. Both are the issue," I said. "One without the other is theater." Evan's mouth tugged in what might have been a private wince. He nodded. He had always been good at nodding. He just rarely paired it with movement. We didn't raise our voices. Chairs did not crash, nothing shattered, but something shifted, a furniture dolly under a piano, a weight redistributed, so that 2 people could hear their footsteps again. I wiped the tea ring away. The marble shone the way it had been taught. Lenora stepped to the counter and straightened a stack of mail that had straightened itself. She had nowhere to put her hands, and so settled for making the stack sharper. The motion made no sound. Do you have the letters? Evan asked, and then corrected himself. Copies. I know you put things back. I have enough, I said. The ocean worked at the stones. Somewhere a neighbor closed a sliding door and it sounded too much like an answer. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't talk about holidays or grandchildren or the weather. We stood in a kitchen and spoke about paper. At some point, Gus's radio drifted over the fence, a baseball game soft as a lullaby in another language. A bat met a ball with a sound like logic. The play-by-play narrated gravity and hope the way men do when a small white thing connects with wood. The sound went on doing its job without asking our permission. I took the folder from the drawer where I had labeled it dull. I set it on the island and opened it so that the dates lined up like ribs. Evan leaned in and read the first page and then the second, and I watched a man teach himself how to absorb a fact without rehearsing a defense. Lenora looked and then looked away, and then looked again, measuring how far confidence could be stretched before it turned skinny. When Evan reached the photograph of the draft, with my name pretending, he let his thumb hover near the corner of the page, and then pulled his hand back as if the ink could leak. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence says I see it. Sometimes it says I did see it and looked away. This one said both. I closed the folder and smoothed the edge with my palm. Don't ask me to accept a story about good intentions, I said. Let the record be the record. He nodded, yes. Lenora didn't nod. She pressed her lips together until color drained. It was the first time that evening she looked smaller than her dress. I lifted my cup and rinsed it at the sink. Water ran warm over porcelain that had outlasted every perfect thing in this house. I dried it with a towel I folded once, then set it back where it likes its light. My hands didn't tremble, the room held. Evan moved to the doorway that looks toward the porch and the seam of water beyond. He stood there, not theatrical, just a man near a threshold, and turned back. Thank you, he said, and he didn't mean for hospitality. Bring me ink, I said, not assurances. He nodded again, and this time the nod wasn't a habit. It was a hinge. The night gathered its weight outside. The villa kept its pale shine. A gull wrote a crooked sentence across the dark and left no punctuation. I clicked off the kitchen light and let the room remember us three in our sizes, standing where we stood with a stack of pages between us that refused to pretend. Morning came without ceremony. The villa hummed as always, measured and pale. I boiled water, poured it into the cracked cup, and let the steam lift. When Evan entered the kitchen, he was already in the careful mode he uses for hard errands. Lenora followed smooth, sleepless, without showing it. I drafted something he said, setting a folder on the island. The printer on the console coughed once as if punctuating him. I opened the folder. The first page titled itself plainly Acknowledgement and Repayment Agreement, with lines that didn't try to be elegant. The numbers sat where numbers go. The date of my transfer lived in the margin. There was a clause about repayment with an option to schedule. Farther down, a sentence described my contribution as gift. Not that I said, tapping the word. Evan didn't argue. He pressed his lips together, crossed out gift, and wrote capital contribution in his square hand. He adjusted the sentence until it read like truth instead of gratitude. And here, I said, pointing to a narrow paragraph about housing. He read it, then looked up. I didn't need to speak it. He struck a line that had the word care sitting where cost once would have pleased Victor Hale. What belongs, he asked. An acknowledgement of time, I said. Not an invoice, just a sentence that knows who held the evenings. He wrote, we recognize Marion's years of childcare and support as part of the foundation of this household. He looked at it the way a carpenter looks down a board to see if it runs true. Lenora stood by the sink, hands folded close enough to count as restraint. We can have a notary this week, she said. This requires pens first, I said. Evan printed clean copies. The machine warmed and delivered them warm. I handed him the blue pen. He signed, handshaking just enough to show work. Lenora initialed the witness line, her letters tidy, controlled. I signed last. My name arrived imperfect human. The downstroke on the M hesitated where it always does. The R made the small lilt my wrist insists on. I dated the page. The room exhaled. He slid one set to me, one to himself. I'll transfer the first portion today, he said. The rest on the schedule we wrote. I set my copy into the dull folder I had named receipts. The word looked right now that it contained something that could carry weight without being carried. The hour after signatures was quiet. Lenora wiped the counter as if the cloth could erase a shape in the air. Evan stood at the doorway to the porch, staring toward the strip of water no one owns. We have the kids at 4, he said to the house. I'll email you confirmations. Fine, I said. I rinsed my cup and left it on a towel, then folded the towel in halves and left it that way. I packed without drama. A suitcase for sweaters, a stack of notebooks bound with a rubber band that had not tired. The photo of Harold holding Evan when the boy fit into the crook of his elbow. I wrapped the cracked cup in a dish towel. It clinked lightly as if remembering a whole conversation. On the nightstand, Harold's watch lay face up asleep and honest. I settled it in my palm and kept it. At the door I paused. Evan waited in the entry folder under his arm. Lenora stood behind him, polished and small. "Do you need help carrying out?" he asked. "I have it," I said. We didn't hug. We didn't make a ceremony. The threshold held all it needed to hold. I stepped through with my back straight and my bag rolling obediently behind. The air outside was warm and slightly salted, the kind that opens the lungs. Gus was repairing a section of fence. He lifted his chin in greeting. "Looks like a day for moving something," he said. "It is," I said. He came around the walkway without asking too many questions, took the heavier box with an economy of motion that suggested long practice and placed it in my trunk with respect usually reserved for instruments. "There you are," he said, and tapped the edge once, a sailor's benediction. I drove inland, then north along the lake road, where the water squares itself into a color closer to pewter than to sea. The cottage sat behind citrus trees that didn't pretend to be art. Paint flaked on the porch rail in honest scabs. The blue door lifted its small cheer under the noon sun. Inside, the rooms met me the way a person meets a name they've been expecting. The kitchen was narrow but clean. The floor complained kindly. I set the cracked cup in the cabinet beside a chipped mug that would be its friend. The window over the sink framed water in a square that reminded me of the envelope May had told me to send a simple witness. I hung the ceramic wind chime I'd bought at the market on a whim that wasn't a whim. The breeze found it and made sound from its shapes. It rang unevenly like handwriting that refuses to become a font. I unpacked slow-stacking books in a way that let my hands remember what they knew. The photo of Harold went on the shelf at eye height, not to make an altar but to keep a history from leaking. I found the tin of tea labeled fennel and slipped the small backup drive inside. The key shape hid among leaves. When the kettle boiled, I poured and carried the cup out to the small porch. The lake made its small negotiations with the shore. A dragonfly wrote letters no one could read. The chime answered wind without competing. Later, a truck pulled into the drive. Evan climbed out with a banker's box under his arm. He looked at the door, then at me, then down at the box, as if it contained a version of himself he wasn't sure he recognized. "I brought the rest," he said. He set the box on the little table by the window and stood looking at nothing. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "The transfer went through. He added more to the room than to me. You'll see it." "All right." He glanced at the wind chime, at the blue door, at the cup in my hand. "This suits you," he said finally. "It does," I said. We didn't fill the space with more than that. He touched the back of a chair, then let his hand fall. At the threshold, he paused, the way a person pauses when a hinge shows them how it works. "If you ever—" He began and then stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing. He lifted a hand, let it be a wave, and left. After the sound of his engine thinned, the quiet remained, but not the kind that supervises. I opened the notebook I keep for mornings and wrote the date and one line, "Agreement signed." Ink matched air. I closed the cover and rested both hands on it. The light slid across the floorboards and settled near the door. I carried my cup into that square and sat down. The crack in the glaze caught the sun like a healed seam. The chime gave 3 small notes that didn't ask to be named. The room held me without telling me how. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.